Well, hello everyone. Welcome to Jobsync's monthly roundtable. This week we're joining on our topic, recruitment operations and how to build a scalable talent operation. We thank you for joining us today. We are cameras up. This session is intended to be a live discussion. So feel free to put your cameras on and also feel free to jump into the conversation if you have something to add to that or if you have a question. If you're uncomfortable with that, feel free to use the chat. You can put any questions or comments you want in the chat as well. I'll be monitoring that, so I'm happy to pull it into that if you're a little shy. But we thank you for joining today. We welcome you to the conversation, but most of all, I'd love to say thank you and welcome to our guests who decided to join us today on this topic, and that is Ben Hebert from Adobe, Susan Williams and Jamie Casassa from Lineage. Thank you for joining us today. And I'm going to pass this over now to our Chief Commercial Officer here at JobSync and the infamous Leah
Oh,
Daniels.
I'm infamous now. Hi, everybody, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Any of you that are overseas with me, good luck on your melting because it is hot. Super excited today to talk about an interesting topic, which is really getting started with recruitment operations. It's a function that is gaining a lot of traction in the recruitment and talent teams. And I want to sort of talk about how do you get started? It's one of those things that adding a new function into your org isn't simple. You don't get to just say, well, it's a good idea this week. Let's add this new role and make it happen. So I want to spend a little bit of time today with our guests talking about how you actually go about doing this with folks who have gone about doing this. So I'm going to have everybody introduce themselves and then we'll sort of get started. I'm going to start with Ben, if you can give us a little bit of color on you, and then I'll pass it off to Susan and then to Jamie.
Sounds great. Thanks, Leah. Hi, everybody. I'm Ben Hebert, and I currently work for Adobe here in Austin, Texas. Been with Adobe now for about 5 months in the talent innovation and analytics space, so a subsection of the rec ops world now, and previously coming from Google, Google Fiber, previously for over a decade, leading different functions in recruiting operations. And I love all things rec ops. More specifically, if you know something about me, I love data. Start with data. And yeah, I'll stop there. Excited to be here.
Susan, you want to grab the baton?
Sure. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Susan Williams. I'm with an organization, Lineage, and I'm responsible for talent acquisition in North America. So we have temperature-controlled storage facilities throughout US and Canada. So the majority of the recruiting that our team does is frontline hourly warehouse. So think forklift drivers, pallet jack operators, case pickers, et cetera. And then all of the leadership that it requires to run that type of organization. I've been with the organization, it'll be 9 years in the fall, and started with a team of one. And
her name was Susan.
I was a team of one supporting an organization that was growing through mergers and acquisitions. And they had reached a tipping point where they wanted to stand up a recruiting department. And they hired an RPO, thinking that that would be the solution, and they hired me to manage that vendor relationship. And as we chat more this afternoon, we'll share our journey and our evolution of how we have now come to be fully insourced, no reliance on RPOs, and big proponents of recruiting operations analysts. All right, over to you, Jamie.
Hello, everybody. I'm Jamie Casassa, and I also work at Lineage. I report into Susan as our recruiting operations analyst, and I have been with Lineage for a year and a half now, and really, Susan's partner in crime when it comes to helping our recruiting team, and my whole career, a little bit about background. I've always been in more of an operational role, supporting the recruiting team. First starting at Glassdoor, I was their very first recruiting coordinator. and then was there for about 7 years and went a couple different companies, but most recently before Lineage was Madison Square Garden, supporting the recruiting team from HR. So I look forward to sharing more about my recruiting ops journey over my career. Excited to be here.
Amazing. So before we jump in, I want to go back in time a little bit and put a little context for everybody. 2 years ago, in June, actually, so exactly 2 years ago, we did a roundtable, and I was super fortunate to have a gentleman named James Colino, I think I'm saying his name right, join us. And he had written a book called Recruiting Ops. And he was one of the first times we had really explored this idea of what is recruiting operations and where does it come from and how do you get one and all the important things. And what was great about this was it was really bringing a concept. Oh, and there's Susan with it. Um, and now I'm going to tell Susan's story a little bit, which is creeping in the back of this particular roundtable with camera definitely off was one Susan Williams, who immediately apparently bought a book and read a book. And it's going to become important as we talk through today. And so I wanted to give that little background of these roundtables are all meant to be educational about what's happening, what other organizations are doing, why they're doing it, how they're doing it, so that not so much you can compete with each other better, but really how you can improve your own business, your own strategy, your own process in a way that brings the entire TA function and elevates all of us to be better at what we're trying to do, which is help people get jobs, help companies succeed with talented people. So with that, Ben, you are going to be my first person. I want to talk about, we keep saying these words, recruiting operations. I also use recruiting operations, recruiting ops, rec ops, talent ops, TA ops, hiring ops, ops. I don't use people ops. I feel like that's HR's problem, but we do use all of these words. And so can you give us a little framing? What are we talking about today?
Yeah, great question. So when I think about and describe recruiting ops, and I love that you said people ops is not recruiting ops. There are many organizations where people ops wants to be recruiting ops, which is always a fun conversation. Recruiting ops is the best analogy that I've shared with people is it's the foundation of your house. So it holds all of the infrastructure that helps and contributes to making recruiting scalable and easy to understand on the business side. And it can include, but is not limited to, process design, tech stack, reporting, compliance, enablement, writing contracts, doing talent marketing, right? Like
sometimes employment branding gets stuck, little sneaks in there. Sometimes you got a little HRIT, like
yep.
liaison, maybe your legal team liaison.
Or sometimes you are the IT for your function, right? Just depending on where you sit. So it really helps just make everything repeatable. It helps make things have a clear understanding of why and visibility. I think that's one of the biggest value adds is the visibility that recruiting operations gives to the organization around how recruiting is contributing to the success of the organization.
I think oftentimes there's two things that people can think about in this kind of function, right? On one hand, if you look around your organization, you just pop your head up for a moment and you look around, you'll go, oh, sales has RevOps and your technology team has DevOps. Your marketing team got MarOps or MarkOps or whatever they're calling it now. Everybody else got one. Where's mine? Right? So there's a little bit of that. But I mean that I'm being a little tongue in cheek, but really it's about the fact that there's a reason why every other part of the org has now carved this function off. There's a reason for it, right? And part of that is at the end of the day, you're already doing recruiting operations if you like it or not. It's not like it's something that totally doesn't exist. It just isn't concentrated in a singular function. Instead, it's a peanut butter situation. We've spread it out everywhere. Everybody gets a little bit of it. So from that perspective, Susan, you want to take us through a little bit of the Lineage journey, and you got off the phone, you bought a book. Tell us about Lineage, tell us about Susan. How did we get to a place where you said, you know, what I think would be real helpful for our business is maybe adding a little bit of Jamie.
Sure. Thank you, Leah. And Ben, I love your adjective visibility, or I guess that's a noun, whatever. My grammar's off. I love your choice of word, visibility. 2 years ago, we had already made the decision to completely insource, and we had hired an exceptional group of recruiters to counterbalance the services that the RPO had been providing. And in attracting those high-performing recruiters, and we scaled up to a team, I don't know, we were north of 50 total supporting North America, US, and Canada. Because I had started as the single representative of TA and had been instrumental in building out our tech stack, right? 2 years ago, we recognized as a leadership team that I was a single point of failure because I held all of that institutional knowledge about how our TA tech stack came to be, where were the integrations, who's Jobsync, how does Jobsync work, why is it a good thing, right?
Yep.
I was a single point of failure. And as the organization was scaling, as our department was scaling, we needed to add even more technology because we're on Workday recruiting, and it is not a searchable ATS. It is not an ATS that enables you to cultivate relationships with your candidates and track that experience. And so we were on a journey and we're about to sign an agreement to implement a CRM. And so we've done that. We've implemented Phenom. But I went to my VP and I said, I can't do this alone. There's just no way. Phenom is too big. It's too complex. I need a different partner than our HR operations team, thank you very much, who was supporting us on Workday recruiting, and our recruiting team. We didn't have this skill set internally. We had fabulous recruiters, we had fabulous leaders, and I had one recruiting coordinator. And the recruiting coordinator had decided to leave to raise her family. So I had that head count. And I went to my leader and I said, I'd really like to repurpose this head count for a very different skill set. And it was after your webinar, Leah, where I really was introduced to RecOps in a tangible way, where I could visualize the business case, right? I could visualize the benefit to Lineage and, you know, the price point, the investment for a RecOps, a really talented RecOps professional is very different than a recruiting coordinator, right? The price point appreciably is very different. And so my leader had to be convinced, it wasn't hard, when I said, look at what we're paying our HR operations systems admins. Just look at that. That's the level of capability that we're talking about. And I was able to articulate names of people who are well regarded in our organization that support us on the Workday side, right? And I said, we need that capability on our side to do all the things that Ben was talking about, right? And she said, okay, we'll do it once the Phenom contract is signed, and we're going to pay for it through cost efficiencies, right, on our advertising spend. I'm like, okay, no problem. I'm all in. And I went looking for Jamie, and as she said, she was with Madison Square Garden, and their loss is our gain. Absolutely. May I share, Jamie, that they made a horrible decision? MSG made a horrible decision to require return to work, mandatory in office, after she had been working for them beautifully remotely from Texas. And so we got a hold of her and I said, ooh, their loss is our gain. And so we've been very, very fortunate.
Jamie, you've been now 3 times into an org without really a recruiting ops function and had the pleasure of figuring out how does it work in this org, not just
Yeah.
how does it work. And Ben, you also have done this now, right? You walk in and you're like, it isn't a not like this is the cookie cutter. I'm just going to put it right here, and then we have recruiting operations. I've not seen it work that way before. So want to take us through the journey of each one as you enter? You've got the business case. Somebody has vouched for you. You've walked in. What does that look like? What does your first day look like? What does your first um, month look like? What's
Yeah.
the journey?
Yeah. And it resonated with me what Ben said about we're not people operations, right? We partner with those folks. But what happens is when you don't have recruiting operations, the recruiting team kind of gets deprioritized often, right? And so having a recruiting operations function or person really can help enhance the team. So I have, to what Leah's saying, joined companies where we didn't have established recruiting operations functions, roles. I mentioned started my career off at Glassdoor. I was an early employee there, and it used to be they called it a build your own desk culture. And that's how the role was. I was there for 7 years, and you wear a lot of different hats. So I was brought in to schedule interviews, and over the course of 7 years, you just you keep adding on, right? It was moving. Big part of my role, like early on in my career, was moving from Jobvite, if anyone remembers that, ATS,
It
to
still exists. It's
Greenhouse.
still there.
Yeah. So I feel like in that experience early in my career, it was so valuable because I just did a mix of things, right? Across HR, across recruiting, and that just really widened my, just skill set. And so that helped when I entered. The next company was Blend, which is a financial services company. And they already had a team of coordinators, but they didn't have a true recruiting operations function. So it was not only managing the coordinators, but there I had to really establish myself as, that proof of concept, right? So it's, that it was introducing the role there. And that had its challenges. The company was growing really fast, but I think what I learned there was, um, just establishing relationships was like the biggest key of how to grow that role. Um, and then at Madison Square Garden after that was actually, as I mentioned, I was a part of the people operations team supporting recruiting. And I made sure, because of my past experience, the difference there at that company is I, day one, showed up to those recruiting team meetings and said, I'm your advocate. Yes, I'm on HR technically, but recruiting is in my heart. And so they trust, I had to build that trust day one of just like, nope, I'm not another person going to tell you that you're, 10 priorities down the list, you're number one. So that's a lesson I learned there. And yeah, as Susan mentioned here at Lineage, it was jumping in head first, tool implementation day one, and just really taking it all in and uh, making sure Susan wasn't that single point of failure, right? We were partners. Like I understood what she needed, and we just dove in here.
Ben, you're 5 months into Adobe, but this is not your first um, recruiting ops role. What are the first things that you look for when you join? Is it about process? Is it about technology? Is it about vendors? Is it about that Jamie's point, building the internal relationships so you can seek to understand? How do you prioritize?
People first. That's where you start every single time. And it also, I recommend not starting at the top. That comes second or third. start with the people who are closest to the work and listen. Actively listen, not just go listen because somebody wrote it out on an onboarding sheet and you're checking off an item on a list. Really get to know not only the individual, but listen for what people aren't telling you, and listen also for the things that they're telling you actively, and put those things together and give yourself time to do that. It's not something you do in week 1, week 2. It's something you do perpetually as part of your role. When you do that well, then you are able to synthesize and go and talk to the leadership team about what you heard, what are the themes. I've done SWOT analysis and done those outputs to be able to show those. That's the easy part, going to leadership. The hard part is getting to know and talking to everybody. And to Jamie's point, building that trust early on, right? In recruiting operations, a lot of recruiters and recruiting functions look skeptically at the operations folks. You've never done my job. You're trying to tell me to do something different than what I know how to do. I've been doing this for 20 years. You've been doing this for 20 minutes. How do you have that credibility to say, yeah, yes, I understand and I relate to what you're going through?
Well, aren't you also often taking their baby? Like, I'm going to take your baby now. I promise to take good care of your baby, but I'm taking your baby because your baby is now under my remit and no longer under yours.
Yeah, 1,000%, right? There's that sense of loss. And so how do you build the trust to say, well, I appreciate and love what you have already done and built, and I'm here to help the organization make it even better than where we're starting from. So it's not a, this is wrong, it's, this is good, let's keep building, we're not done yet. And I think that's the continuous improvement mindset for recruiting operations. When you do it well, it's a team sport, right? It's something that everybody gets to participate in. They feel the result and they understand the why. I think that's probably the most important part when you start a new recruiting ops organization, is building out what's the North Star? What does recruiting feel like to the organization when recruiting does it well?
You just said two things that are really interesting. One, which is you need to have a continuous mindset, right? So continuous improvement mindset, right? Which is one of it. But it really is tying into a bigger question, which is the second thing you said, which you've not done my job. Recruiting ops is a different role than a recruiter. Not to say that a talented recruiter cannot make the jump and become a talented recruiting operations person. Totally possible. I think Jamie's a good example. But it is somewhat of a different type of person. You're often hiring for a different skill set than what you would hire in your own environment for a recruiter. So let's dig into that for just a second. What are the skills that you really want to focus in on as you make these hires? And there's almost two different things here. There's your first hire and the skill set your first hire needs, which might be a little different than your skill sets for hire 2 or 3 and so forth as you build out the function. Who wants to take that? Don't make me pick on people.
No, it's okay, Leah. I had to find the mute button.
Oh, okay.
You're challenging me to think long term about the second, third, and fourth hire for our team, right? It was easy to zero in on the skill set. It wasn't easy to find Jamie, but it was really easy to zero in on the skill set because it was, what was the work that I was doing that there was no one else that I could delegate to because they didn't have the interest, skills, capability, right? And so it helped me recognize that not half, but a large portion of my job was data, analytics, system analysis, process efficiencies, reporting, analyzing trends, making recommended adjustments based on those trends, but having to dig through the raw data, right? With no one else that had that capability, right? So identifying that profile that we were so lucky to find Jamie. There's also an element of change management, right, that's involved. There's an element of project management, but very heavy on the analytical capability, right? Because of what we had in front of us, right? We were on the cusp of a very large system implementation that was going to have lots of cascading impact on processes, change management, and a real deep needing to have a deep understanding of the impact across a very diverse group of recruiters, some of which were embracing the opportunity and others that are very resistant and want to just keep doing what they're doing. When I think about what's coming in the future for us, when you made the comment about talent marketing, branding, automating campaigns, really leveraging all of the data and candidate information that we have right now, we don't have that skill set, right? So as we just finished this large implementation of Phenom as a CRM for our global TA organization, we're now recognizing that next chapter is how do we really maximize that investment within the TA structure, not going to marketing, but within talent acquisition. How do we own marketing, branding, campaigning, and really cultivating those candidate experiences? Totally different skill set.
Totally different skill set. Now you're thinking differently about that higher
Right.
2 and 3 and 4, right? And so you have a
Right.
specialization piece that starts to come in to all of this.
Mhm.
Ben, you've done this before. I know you've built bigger teams. Do you find yourself creeping into the brand marketing and pieces, or are you finding more of your folks tend to focus data and analytics or something else?
Yeah, the brand marketing has always been something that's kind of just fallen into the lap because nobody else wanted to do it, right? It's always that thing that's like, you've got lots of applications, you've got people finding people. Why would you possibly care about that particular aspect of it? So I would say it's not necessarily the talent marketing piece that comes up a ton. To Susan's point, it's always, what can you tell me that we don't already know? So who can you have that, one, can go into raw data and translate that into insights? And I think the other important piece, has enough acumen to know when something doesn't look right. So it goes back to that relationship about the process. If you're starting from zero, you don't have process documentation. You probably don't understand how all of the different ways that data can be malformed, how it can be credible or not credible, and the ways that it can be manipulated. So you're looking for, when I think about building the function out, I think about looking for people with systems thinking skills that have the ability to see how all of the parts connect, to have a more holistic view. And I would even argue that it's not only in recruiting, that it's how do we connect our function to the overall business success, and where are there opportunities for symmetry, to your earlier point, Leah, with all of the other operations functions, because you're all doing essentially the same thing. So how do you help build that community to come together and talk about how do you effectively build something that runs like an effective operations machine to drive the organization forward?
You just said healthy. I heard healthy skeptics are things that you look for as a skill set. It's really funny because I think that in the market, that's going to become much harder to get a hold of, because anyone who uses AI in their org also needs a whole bunch of healthy skeptics who, look at Claude and say, sorry, Claude, but that seems very wrong, versus, oh, Claude said this, it must be right. Right. So it's an interesting statement, because more and more we're hearing, right, the need for people to be healthy skeptics. And you're saying not only do they need to be a healthy skeptic, they have to be super analytical, super data driven, a healthy skeptic. And oh, by the way, it'd be great if they're also process centric and understand not only process, but how to identify process failure or process manipulation. Sorry, had to say it, but I got the pleasure of working with third-party staffing firms for a number of years, and there is no better group of recruiters to manipulate a process than a third-party staffing firm. They can cheat every way possible. So,
Leah,
you thinking about all this? Yes. Oh no, you disagree?
apologies. No. Apologies
Yep.
for interrupting.
No.
When I was listening to Ben, you reminded me about my very aspirational expectations of the recruiting coordinator that I hired years ago. I had single headcount, one recruiting coordinator, and she had a bachelor's degree in information systems. So she was educated in data. I only had one headcount. And so we redesigned the role not to be a traditional recruiting coordinator because there wasn't enough capacity in her to really do all of the tactical admin tasks for our full team. But when you said someone who can access the raw data and interpret it and provide insights, that's where we were broken. That's where we didn't have that capability. And it was a real disappointment on my part, right? I thought I'm going to really use this role in a way that's going to be super effective for us based on her education and her interest and her capabilities. And it didn't come to fruition. So for those that are listening, right, it really is a very elevated skill set. And there's a way to interview for it and there's a way to assess for it that's very different than someone who is system savvy and can run reports. So thanks, Leah.
Oh no, that's great. Where I was headed with this is, as we're talking about data and reporting, so actually this kind of works out lovely. And the additive fun of AI into all of our worlds now. How are you guys thinking about reporting? Like, what are the first things that you want reported out for your business? And then where are you going? What's the trajectory for recruiting operations? So I heard at the beginning, Susan, you were like, I want data trends. I want to know what the data is telling me in terms of what's happening, either internally, externally, or across the business. But what is it that you guys really find that recruiting ops can bring to the data and reporting table that is more than what you could do? And I say this to you all the time, Susan, off the side of your desk, which is what you were doing.
We have been able to elevate our internal customer satisfaction level because our leaders have access to Jamie directly at the business level, right? At the business unit level. She supports them directly on whatever data they may need. And that just wasn't scalable before, right? And so our internal customers are really appreciative of that level of service, which is new for them. Because she understands what they're asking for. It's not difficult. She's super easy to do business with when they need to make a modification. She's part of our leadership team, so she knows what our strategy is at the corporate level, right? She's part of our understanding of what might be some confidential projects that we're working on. When a leader's asking for data, she's right there with them and able to support them and understand what they may need in order to support those initiatives. So that's one of the biggest things. The other thing that we've observed is much more efficient budget management, whether it's our travel budget for our team, whether it's our ad spend, whether it's really understanding functionality of all the different modules within our TA tech stack, right? Where we may or may not be utilizing them. She's helping to analyze utilization continuously and helping us to optimize that. But that's where we're seeing some of the immediate big ticket thrill. Just people are thrilled with the results.
We talk internally about Gartner has 3 R's when they think about organizations, right? Everybody cares about 3 things. They're all R's. They care about revenue, they care about risk, and they care about ROI. And what I heard, Jamie, maybe not revenue, but definitely risk and ROI are your mandates. And Ben, same thing, right? Those pieces are massive when the org looks down into your team and says, what have you done for me lately? being able to come back with the reporting that answers the risk question or answers the ROI question of your investments. Am I hearing that right? Ben, yes. Are there secondary things that you think about from a data perspective that tie back to other things outside of that?
Yeah. Well, it might be related to risk. And I 100% agree with what Susan was describing. I also, and this is something that I'm working on today, is the internal data quality piece, and how are you measuring that, and how do teams know or leaders know that your processes are working, your data is clean, right? Thinking about, this is probably harsh of a term, but building forensic audits and measurements that are important to the organization that support the, I'll call it the externally facing data that needs to go out, right? Because nobody likes to show up in those conversations and the leader goes, "That's wrong," or "I don't believe that. How could that possibly be true?" From the recruiting space. And so for me, I look at that as a risk mitigation strategy, right? Because it helps build the credibility. And it's something that's often overlooked because everybody wants to build shiny and pretty dashboards for the business side. And not so much, it's far less sexy to talk about this process is broken. You didn't move this person from here to here and at the right time in the right way. But it all contributes to, again, that foundation that helps make everybody successful.
I have to ask it because we're in the data area here. So let's talk about AI. Let's talk about the good, the bad, the ugly, the mandates from way up high, the realities when it comes down to it, and the risk component that comes along with this, right? We're all watching lawsuits. We're all watching candidates have a field day with AI Autobots. They're like Transformers, little Autobots. Yeah, you're welcome, Ben. That was for you. But AI is here. It's for real. It's going to be part of our world, but it also introduces a ton of complexity into the org. And I feel like it's falling squarely on the leaders of TA and the recruiting ops teams to sort it out. What can we do? What can we not do? What should we try? How do we put it in a box so that we're comfortable with what we're doing and we don't feel like we're introducing risk into the org in a place that we shouldn't, especially given, and I do think we forget this sometimes, that we are the caretakers of a shocking amount of PII, staggering amount of data that we sit upon in our systems on people's personal information and personal lives. So now, as we are moving forward into a world in which we are introducing third-party tools and AI and so forth, how are you guys thinking about it? Where are you all with this journey? How's it going? Jamie, I feel like you want to jump in.
Sure. Yeah. Um, for me, recruiting at the end of the day, we are, with candidates, this is their livelihood. They're making a job decision. We need to have the human component, right? We need to make sure that that stays in recruiting, that it's not just all automated. I just firmly believe, yeah, recruiter and candidate, that relationship is just still so important to, keep intact. And so I truly think for us using AI, it's just more automation, right? That what can we do to eliminate admin tasks for recruiters? That's the big kind of just for us how we're successfully using it. And it's things like our CRM has like a fit score. You're putting in things like matching criteria, skills, ideal candidates, and it's really helping you sort through if a rec gets 800 plus applications, it can help you sort and filter and get through those resumes quicker. Or, AI is helping our recruiters, um, with their email templates and just their messaging, like those types of things. It's like more of that assistant and automation, but still, again, we're here at Lineage, definitely just rooted in the human element staying intact.
And do you have a different point of view or similar?
I think adjacent point of view. I think one of the things that I'm seeing a ton of just in the macro environment, and you're seeing some of this get reversed right now. There's been this strategy, just unleash all of the AI into the organizations and y'all will figure it out. Good luck. And success looks like, well, if you're using it constantly throughout your day, you must know what AI can do and you're using it effectively. You're not putting any FPII or PII into AI that shouldn't be there. You know what should go in and what shouldn't go in these kinds of tools, right? So I do agree automation over AI, and I'll give a spicy take on automation and AI. I think the automation AI piece is going, as much as people say that AI is going to eat SaaS, I do think the way that recruiting goes, that AI will become customization at scale for recruiting, which means that the tools that support our process will become invisible. And that means a lot of these platforms that we use and touch and talk to all day will all disappear. You won't need this configuration. It's going to be a backend that supports individual preferences in the way they need that are both compliant and ensure that process and the people part of it is all maintained. To Jamie's point, the human in the loop is the most important part. And I would argue that recruiting is all about people and building connection and less about how well can you game or talk to a computer.
I think that your comment about SaaS is an interesting one because at the end of the day, the one thing that I think is true, no matter what happens, is that everybody in the business is still going to be required to report out something. And data, we call them data lakes and I call them data swamps sometimes, but it's not messy and just a bunch of data you dropped in. Everything's still in a rational database with lines and rows and columns and all of the things that we would otherwise think about as Excel. And in order for it to get there, there is still a process for data consumption to go and get organized. Because if you want reporting on the other side, you can't have a data swamp. You do have to have some structure and order. So I think a lot of what you're saying is really the AI is going to be a layer that lives, that helps organize to get you back into that structured data. I still think that exists in the back. I don't think it goes away. I do think, though, that we are going to go through a journey together with AI usage from the recruiting side. We have a colleague here in the UK who used to run talent for a couple of large organizations, and he has this saying that I absolutely love, which is every day the talent leader walks in, or especially on their first day, you didn't choose the systems, you didn't choose the jobs to work on, you didn't choose your team, you didn't choose the budget, you didn't choose the hiring managers, and by the way, you also didn't choose the regulation and compliance. Now, here's your foam sword, put a smile on your face, and you go do the best job you can do. Good luck, Don Quixote. And he's kind of got something there, right? Like you really do start your day with a variety of things that are holding you in a very specific way, and you have to work around and through all these systems and process. And so I think we are glomming on to this magical idea of AI, like just sort out everything. It's going to solve all the problems, and it's quietly creating its own set of problems and things that I think we are going to find globally in particular is how does the freight train that is the Workday lawsuit with Mobley and the Eightfold lawsuit with Kessler, how does that come at GDPR and the ICO out of the UK who are thinking about keeping the human in the loop, right? The ICO is said some really interesting things, which is this is like, Jamie, you guys are using a fit score. And they're like, oh, that's lovely. You all have a fit score. But how do you know the AI didn't get it wrong? How do you know? Right? And you go, oh, well, he's a human in the loop. They looked at everything. They definitely didn't look at all 1,000, but then they also didn't look at all 1,000 when you didn't have it. So is it right or wrong, right? It's a really interesting problem, but it's still in debate. And so I think we all have a journey ahead of us as the tools mature at a rate faster than anything has ever seen now. And the technology is still somewhat stable in the back. I don't think, I mean, Susan, I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure nobody at Lineage is like, you know what we're going to do today? Let's get rid of Workday. We'll just forget that investment.
No, no, no. I'm that leader that you were describing that I was told we're going with Workday recruiting. I was like, yeah, yeah,
I'll take
best
two.
choice,
You know what?
best choice ever.
I like two of them. They're so good. I want both.
But Leah, on our platform, we receive hundreds of thousands of applications every year, hundreds of thousands, and recruiters are just they're worn down, right? They're disenchanted with the role. And how do you help motivate and sustain them and give them a set of tools that puts them in contact with not the best, but the most likely to be successful candidate, right? Of the ones that applied, right? And so we're just a few months in, but that has really been energizing for our team, right? As Jamie was describing, right? In the Chicago, if anybody supports Chicago, you advertise in Chicago, you don't even have to spend money on the job boards, right? You get hundreds and hundreds of applications. It can be really depressing, right? To show up on Monday morning when you need to hire 20 forklift drivers and you got 500 applications over the weekend, right? Now that same recruiter can articulate for these particular roles, this is what I need. Help me look through this, behemoth of applications and build my call list for me. We're still doing call lists. We're still doing human to human, but it's so much more energizing because the recruiters are talking to those that are most likely to meet expectations. And before, we had no way of knowing how to find them with efficiency.
Start at the top and just one at a time.
Date timestamp is just
Yep.
nauseating. Yeah.
This is a great segue to process architecture. Ben, you walk in, you almost always are met with tasks. Day one, here are some tasks for you. You're like, no, I need to go talk to people. They're like, no, you need to do these tasks. Right. But really, recruiting ops does become part of the task management system of the team. And what are the right tasks and when should we do them? How do you think about that? How do you start distributing that? And how do you find where you can automate versus where do you keep the human part in those tasks? Because there are still human tasks. Susan's point, you make a phone list. You still need to pick up the phone.
Yeah, I start with the inventory. So, what are all of the tasks that could be done? And then go, which ones should be done? And I think the question that you asked, like, oh, here are tasks to do, I think being able to flip that narrative and saying, yes, I understand those are the tasks. Here, let me show you all the ones you're not asking me for, and let me tell you the ones that we should do versus the ones that should wait or shouldn't be done at all. And then as you build the team, the matching the skill set of the folks on the team, interests, capabilities, right? All of those things to be able to divide out the task based on importance. And the other part that I think is extremely beneficial, especially coming off of the metrics conversation, if you're not able to quantify not just the number of tasks or tickets or whatever it is you set up, but how is that translating into the impact that the recruiting team and the business feels, that's where I think a lot of recruiting ops teams make the mistake of we're the task, we're the operations team. So we do tickets, we do these things, and it looks more like a support function than a strategic investment. And that translation becomes far more important than anything else. So I would say it's create the inventory and advocate for your point of view before you let somebody else dictate to you what needs to be done first, second, and third.
I'm sure you love it when people say, you're like, hey, this is a bunch of tasks. I'm not sure we should be doing this. And they go, but we've always done it that way. That's your favorite.
I love that. That is my favorite. I always
I
have a
love
big smile on my face when I hear that.
that. Jamie, what are the single process changes that you made in any of the roles? We'll pick on Lineage specifically that really had big impact in a positive way on the whole team.
Yeah, the one that comes to mind is one where it wasn't traditionally a function of recruiting. So it was at a company called Blend, and it was when I was voluntold that I would be taking over onboarding. And, instead of, kicking and screaming, it was me and the head of TA said, let's take it as an opportunity, right? We in recruiting do all the hard work in finding these folks, and then we get them to sign their offer, and then we don't know what happens. We're very like recruiting sometimes has no clue. Did they even show up? You know, and we were like, well, it's under our umbrella. And so we took all those pieces of the process. We looked at like Ben said, you look at every task, every step, and we eliminated redundancies. We focused on the integrations. I built that relationship with IT to really help automate, between our systems and their systems. And it was great because ultimately the candidate experience, we had a through line from apply to day one and orientation. And it all made sense. It all was consistent, whether it was the messaging, the, marketing aspect, the branding, it was all just one brand. So I would say that was one of those where we just picked apart a process. And again, it wasn't quote unquote typical recruiting's job, but we made it enhance the whole process there.
Were you able to measure an outcome? So did you find that you had less people fall out during that 2 to 3 week period of time is sort of a dangerous time, right? Where they can decide to retract their acceptance, just not show up, ghosting being everybody's favorite thing now, right? Were you able to measure that impact?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really was with that, we did do surveys, right? We did do candidate experience surveys, but then we did do 30, 60, 90 days because we were like, is this going to help them stay with the company that they felt like they were set up for success? I mean, little things like could they log into their laptop? That
Did
that
did
is
they get a
huge.
laptop?
And yeah. Those are huge things. Did everything make sense? All the communications from recruiting and yeah, so we were able to measure that kind of satisfaction. And again, it just goes back to we could in recruiting, just hopefully get, retention, right? Recruiting usually can't influence or help that. And so this was an example where maybe we were able to move the needle a bit.
Ben, do you have a counterexample or a different example, similar concept of an activity or a process, something you changed that really had an outsized impact on the business? Like, no, don't ask me this question.
Yeah, this is a good one. I'll stay in the same onboarding vein because we
Oh.
redesigned onboarding. So one of the things that we adjusted was the equipment process, right? For onboarding. So I think everybody in the organization believed that, well, we've always done it this way, we have to do it. And when we posed the idea, well, what if we didn't have to do it that way and we did something else? one of the changes that we implemented was that there would be devices that are locally managed instead of centrally managed. So because it was a high volume area, instead of shipping things back and forth constantly all over the place, just ship the right number to the location and have the ops team manage the inventory and just build out the right controls and process between IT and security and HR and the business. There was a ton of investment, and now suddenly you go from I can't start anybody for 11 days to I can start somebody who signs on Friday on Monday.
Because you don't need to go buy a computer, get it set up, ship it across the country, pay FedEx, all the things.
All the things. So
Amazing.
it changed the experience not only for the business but also for candidates, right? They don't have those weird I can't log in, I can't do this. Like it's all ready to go.
Or worse, they show up on day one, they still have a computer, and they're like, "Can I just use my personal one? Is that allowed? How do you mind?" Anyway, just look at the time, guys. We're wrapping up. I want to start by saying thank you so much. Susan knows this. I have been quietly trying to get to a point where I could ask her to join me on one of these roundtables. So I'm so thrilled to have you join us. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Ben, for joining and sharing and talking about the journey. I know we got 1 inch deep on an iceberg that goes really, really deep, and it's a thing we could probably talk about all year long. But I think it's such an important topic to start talking about because more and more organizations are really thinking about how do we make recruiting more efficient. And what I don't think is the right answer is to yell at your TA leaders and say, do it better. Think you have to look at them and say, how do we make the right investments so that we are not asking our TA leaders to also be our recruiting ops people as well as their day job. So thank you all for joining us. I really appreciate everybody. Julie and I are putting together next month. We will get that out to you shortly. But in the meantime, if you guys have any questions, feel free to email us or I put everybody's LinkedIn into the chat. So feel free to connect with Ben, Susan, and Jamie. On that note, guys, thank you, everyone. Have a fabulous end of June. Bye now.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Leah.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you.